Hello and welcome to today's live stream. We are going to talk about Claroty's State of XIoT Security report that was published this week. This is our biannual report examining and analyzing the published OT, IoT, and IoMT vulnerabilities for the second half of 2022. Joining me today is Barr Offner. Barr is the lead author of the report, and we're going to talk about some of the big trends that emerge from this particular data set and what it means to you as a security leader and practitioner. So let's bring in Barr. How you
Hi,
doing?
everyone.
Good to
Hi,
see you.
how are you
So
doing, Mike?
good, thank you. So maybe introduce yourself. I know that this is your second time writing this report. Maybe as you introduce yourself, also talk about kind of how the data is collected, what you do to analyze it, and maybe a little bit about the sources that are involved.
Yeah, so I'm a security researcher at Claroty. My what I'm doing in this report is me and my team are collecting a lot of data, especially from sources like NVD, ICSA, and vendor advisories. In order to create this database, we went through thousands of publicly available advisories and extracted a lot of information out of them. Um, so yeah, this is my second time doing this report, and I'll mention the previous reports while talking on this report.
So I guess one of the big findings for me in the report has got a lot of data points about the vulnerabilities that were published in the second half of last year. But one of the big findings for me is we're seeing for the second straight report the number of vulnerabilities in our data set going down, but the number of vendor product security teams that are disclosing vulnerabilities going way up. So let's talk about that a little bit. What do you think that's an indication of? What's happening there?
Yeah, so while the number of vulnerabilities found by vendors is going up, it may seem like products are becoming more vulnerable, but it's actually quite the opposite. So the more vendors find vulnerabilities in their existing products, the better the security overall of the products will become.
And so do you think that this is a sign of, automation companies, healthcare companies, medical device makers, that their security programs, cybersecurity programs, that they're maturing and they're growing, and are they putting more resources into them? What's your perspective there?
Yeah, I think so. Overall, we can see that more and more vendors are establishing their own product security page and improving it by adding necessary features like PGP keys and secure email addresses in order to make the process more discreet and safer for disclosures. And from our experience in TMD2, we even saw 11 vendors that after we disclosed a vulnerability to them, we guided them to creating their own product security page, and they created a page which is very secure and works for the best interest of the entire cybersecurity community.
And
The more I think that this will make future disclosures with external researchers easier for them and for overall for everyone.
so, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because I know as a researcher, sometimes the relationship with vendors isn't that easy. It isn't easy to share information with them. Um, you know, Talk about some of those challenges. What are you seeing there?
Sometimes vendors actually are not responsive. Sometimes we saw some stuff like that. I'm actually not a vulnerability researcher myself, so I am not. I don't do this regularly, but I've seen some stuff from the other teams, which we saw some vendors not cooperating, and this is very important. And vendors will cooperate, and together we can create a safer cybersecurity world for our products.
And obviously this translates into hopefully vulnerabilities getting patched and vendors getting better at securing their products. So are you seeing that products are coming to market more secure?
Yeah, so the more vulnerabilities published by vendors, and the bigger the share of those vulnerabilities will be out of the total number published, I think we could see that vendors are improving because um, when while we see a rise in the share of their self-disclosures, we're also seeing the share of vulnerabilities found by external entities slowly going down. These external entities are like, for example, organizations like Claroty itself and other security companies. And this means that external researchers are probably having a harder time finding those vulnerabilities in those OT and medical and IoT products. Because unlike the vendors, they don't have access to the internal code and the design of the products. So it might make it easier for them to find vulnerabilities for the vendors, not for their external researchers.
Right.
Yeah.
So you think that products are becoming more secure? I mean, obviously that's the goal of this. We don't want to just count vulnerabilities. We want to make a difference in the security of these products.
By looking at the data of the recent years, I'm really believing that products are getting more secure because of what I said earlier, and I think this is great because those products are part of some very critical processes in our daily lives, and they should be very secure. And while this trend is still continuing and product security is getting better, my personal belief is that malicious actors are also getting better at abusing those security flaws because the industry always evolves. And even though vendors are getting better at security, organizations should still do whatever they can to protect their networks. For example, installing the latest patches and using threat detection and other stuff we will talk about later.
Right. So let's dig into the data a little bit. OT vulnerabilities in industrial control system software and firmware, those types of vulnerabilities still dominate our data set. I think it was 74% of the published vulnerabilities that were disclosed in the last half of last year. What are the types of vulnerabilities that impact OT the most, and at what levels of the Purdue model, and maybe some context as to why that might be particularly concerning to you as a researcher?
Yeah. So the most common we're seeing the most common level of the Purdue model is the level 3 because this level is the operation management level, and our database of this past half a year contains 62% of the OT vulnerabilities we found were part of this level 3, which this level is mostly comprised of engineering workstations, historian servers, and remote management servers. And these are mostly software-based components. So this makes vulnerabilities easier to patch, but also easier to exploit. And these are the level 3 is also closer to the outside networks. So it might be easier for attackers to get to this level and use these servers as lateral movement vectors.
Mm-hmm.
The second level belongs to level 1, which is RTUs and PLCs, control devices. 25% of the vulnerabilities were part of this level. And these devices are very valuable to threat actors because they control most of the processes happening. So if an actor interrupts the process and the regular operations of those devices, it can cause massive damage and even downtime and physical damage, which is not something we want.
Right. And we should point out too something about vulnerabilities at level 3, that those can be used to reach up into the corporate network too. It's not just on the process side, correct?
Yeah. This is the level that connects between the OT level, the OT area of network, to the outside area, to the corporate network. So this is a very important level for an attacker to leverage, and we want to protect this level.
So let's spend some time talking about some of the remediations and mitigations that that emerged in the second half of last year in the data set. What trends are important in that section of the report to you? I know, like, for example, there were a lot of software vulnerabilities that had full remediation as opposed to some of the end of life stuff that isn't even touched anymore, obviously.
Yeah, so about the remediations, there's a clear trend we've been seeing lastly in the past years. So this trend is that software vulnerabilities, when they get a patch, it's often much more quicker than firmware ones, because the firmware patches are much harder to develop and deploy. And the thing is that because those vulnerability patches take so much time to be released and applied in the network, this could make many of the important devices, level 1, for example, and medical and building automation devices, it could make them much more vulnerable because many of them are firmware based. So this is why organizations that utilize this type of devices should be really, really careful and should track those vulnerabilities very, very carefully and try to update and patch as much as they can and as soon as possible.
What about products that are end of life?
Yeah, so another thing here about end of life. So these products are, because they are end of life, they probably won't get a patch. Most of them don't get a patch, even though they are vulnerable, because vendors are not supporting them anymore. So the thing is that these products, because they won't have any patch, and they could be very vulnerable with time, because they won't have any patches, and as time goes, those products will get more and more vulnerable. And as of this half of the year, in our data set, 69% of the vulnerabilities that affect of the vulnerabilities that affect end of life devices can cause critical impacts, such as RCE, remote code execution, or denial of service, which is something that is very, very concerning.
And we should probably mention too that basic security hygiene practices like network segmentation, phishing protection, remote access controls, they all figured pretty highly in the advisories that were published in the second half of the year as mitigation advice, especially if there isn't a patch available. All right. Yeah. So a final question, Barr. Obviously, this is a big report. A lot of work went into it, a lot of data points. If I'm a security leader, a CISO, or even at the engineering level, healthcare professionals that are involved with IT and cybersecurity, how should they use this report?
So this report, because it's so large and it conveys many trends that can help us understand better what are the threats and the risks of the XIoT world. And we can see that vulnerability and patch management is very important, for example, especially for end-of-life devices, just like we talked about. And and even though vendors are getting better at securing the products and organizations, organizations should stay alert and keep investing their resources in defense against cybersecurity threats, for example, threat detection software. And also, apply vendor recommendations and mitigations such as segmentation, secure remote access, cloud risk management, because it reduces the attack surface for your organizations, and it's something that came from this report. So it would be really good to read it, because there are many conclusions just like this.
Yeah. So urge everyone who's watching to download the report at claroty.com. Barr, thank you so much for coming on the live stream, and congratulations on all the good work. This is an important report.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.